The Express's selective communication standards, a decade of silence, 8 months of relentless criticism, an editorial by Professor Wall Street. The Trinidad Express's latest editorial, PM Must Communicate Better, represents yet another installment in what has become a relentless weekly campaign against Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessa's administration. The editorial's demands for honest, timely, and professional communication would be almost credible if the Express hadn't remained conspicuously silent for the entire decade from 2015 to April 28, 2025, while the PNM government presided over far more serious communication failures and genuine national crises. The pattern is unmistakable. 10 years of editorial silence during PNM governance, followed by 8 months of weekly criticism since the UNC took office. This isn't journalism, it's transparent partisan positioning that destroys credibility and betrays democratic responsibility. The fundamental question the Express refuses to address: where were these weekly editorials demanding better communication from Dr. Keith Rowley? Where was this editorial alarm about government reticence when the PNM failed to communicate about economic collapse, rising poverty, healthcare crises, or energy sector decline? The answer is obvious. The Express remained silent. No weekly editorials criticizing PNM communication. No alarm about public anxiety during genuine crises. The newspaper that now discovers communication inadequacies on a weekly basis couldn't find words to critique a decade of PNM communication failures. Here are 10 reasons why the Fourth Estate's weekly editorials expose transparent bias against the Persad-Bissessa government. 1. The decade of silence. Where were the weekly PNM editorials? During the PNM's decade in power, the Express produced virtually no weekly editorials demanding better communication about the collapsing economy, energy sector decline, healthcare failures, crime reaching historic highs, the lost OFAC license, the Dragondale collapse, COVID-19 border closures stranding citizens, economic policies increasing black people living below the poverty line from 17.3% under Kamla Persad-Bissessa from 2010 to 2015 to 26.3% under Rowley, or state of emergency declarations. Yet within 8 months of the UNC taking office, the Express has established weekly editorial criticism. The newspaper demands communication about matters inherited from the PNM, including the very status of forces agreement the PNM signed. If government communication matters so much, why no weekly editorials for 10 years while the PNM communicated poorly about genuine crises? The obvious answer: the Express applies different editorial standards and frequencies based on which party governs. 2. The public anxiety manufactured by media. The Express claims to respond to genuine public anxiety while ignoring its own role in manufacturing this anxiety through breathless, alarmist coverage, presenting routine security cooperation as existential crisis. Media outlets have presented standard radar installation as controversial escalation, speculated wildly without evidence, framed operational security as lies, generated apocalyptic US-Venezuela conflict scenarios, and amplified opposition criticism while minimizing government explanations. Then, having manufactured anxiety through sensationalist coverage, the Express blames government for not calming the very anxiety the newspaper created. This is journalistic malpractice, generating crisis through irresponsible reporting, then criticizing government for the manufactured crisis. 3. The WhatsApp channels don't substitute condescension. The Express dismissively claims WhatsApp channels do not substitute for serious conversation with the public. This represents stunning condescension toward modern communication and willful ignorance of how political communication has evolved globally. Written statements via WhatsApp and social media offer precision, avoiding misinterpretation, careful consideration of security implications, permanent records, ability to consult advisors, and direct citizen reach without media filtering. The Express's dismissal reveals a newspaper bitter that it no longer exclusively controls the gateway between government and citizens. The complaint isn't that WhatsApp communication is inadequate. It's that this bypasses traditional media gatekeepers who previously could filter and distort government messages. 4. Ignoring that Rowley communicated far less effectively. Dr. Keith Rowley communicated far less frequently and effectively than Prime Minister Prasad Bissessar, yet never faced weekly Express editorials. Rowley's patterns included disappearing for weeks during crises, refusing regular press conferences, providing vague information, dismissing questions as propaganda, showing contempt for accountability, and failing to explain policies causing poverty increases. Where were the Express's weekly editorials then? The silence was complete and deliberate. The Express accepted communication inadequacy from Rowley that it now finds intolerable from Prasad Bissessar. This double standard exposes transparent partisan bias. 5. The deliberate, misled mischaracterization. The Express includes a jab about why she deliberately misled the population on the U.S. radar installation. This represents continued dishonest characterization of operational security as said to deliberate misleading. The Prime Minister explained that security operations require graduated disclosure, standard protocol worldwide. Initial vague statements served as operational security cover until installation was substantially complete. This isn't misleading. It's operational security 101. Yet the Express insists on framing it as dishonesty, revealing determination to transform legitimate security protocols into scandals. Notably, the Express never accused the PNM of deliberately misleading during a decade of actual deception about economic performance, poverty statistics, and policy outcomes. 6. The impossible standard, damned either way. The Express creates an impossible standard where the Prime Minister is criticized regardless of approach. Detail immediate disclosure, compromising operational security discretion, deliberately misleading. Written statements, avoiding serious conversation. Press conferences, risk statements compromising security or media distortion. Explaining security requirements, making excuses. This damned either-way framing reveals the Express isn't genuinely concerned about communication quality. The newspaper has predetermined that whatever the Prime Minister does is inadequate. This is opposition editorial positioning, not constructive criticism. 7. Ignoring actual communication successes. The Express completely ignores extensive Prime Minister communication, detailed Dragon Deal statements, energy sector revival explanations, clear positions on drug trafficking, transparent U.S. cooperation discussion within security constraints, regular economic policy updates, media accessibility, and direct social media communication. Rather than acknowledging this record, the Express simply asserts inadequacy. This reveals editorial determination to find fault regardless of performance, the hallmark of partisan opposition rather than fair assessment. 8. The THA election, timing revelation. The Express acknowledges political mischief connected to the impending Tobago House of Assembly elections, while dismissing this as insufficient explanation. But this acknowledgement exposes exactly what's happening. Opposition forces and sympathetic media manufacturing security controversy ahead of elections. The Express participates through alarmist coverage, then dismisses suggestions that political timing matters. The newspaper reveals awareness that political calculations drive controversy while refusing to admit media complicity. 9. The 26-seat mandate dismissal. The Express states, a 26-seat mandate is no immunity against the rising temperature of public fear, representing stunning dismissal of democratic legitimacy. The UNC coalition's decisive 26-seat victory is a clear democratic mandate with legitimate authority for policy decisions. The Express's suggestion that electoral mandates provide no immunity against media-manufactured anxiety argues that electoral victories don't matter. Newspapers can generate enough public fear to override democratic choices. If the Express believes electoral mandates don't protect governments from media pressure, why didn't it apply this standard during PNM tenure? The answer: electoral mandates mattered when the PNM held them, but don't matter when the UNC does. 10. The fundamental fourth estate betrayal. The Express's pattern of weekly editorials after 8 months of UNC governance, following 10 years of near silence during PNM rule, represents complete betrayal of fourth estate responsibility. Independent media serves democracy by holding all governments accountable with consistent standards. The Express has abandoned these principles entirely. Editorial frequency and intensity are determined not by actual performance, but by which party holds power. This destroys credibility and betrays democratic responsibility. When citizens recognize that newspapers apply wildly different editorial standards based on which party governs, they correctly conclude media cannot be trusted as independent arbiters. What the Express should acknowledge. An intellectually honest editorial would acknowledge its decade of editorial silence during PNM governance, explain why communication failures warranting weekly criticism now didn't warrant similar criticism then, recognize that modern communication methods are legitimate, distinguish between operational security and dishonesty, and apply consistent standards regardless of which party governs. Instead, the Express produces weekly editorials finding fault with communication quality exceeding what the PNM provided throughout their decade, while ignoring its own complicity in manufacturing the anxiety it claims government should address. In conclusion, the Express's lost credibility. The Trinidad Express's editorial would be compelling if the newspaper had produced similar weekly editorials about Dr. Keith Rowley's communication failures during his decade in power. But the Express remained largely silent for 10 years, then established weekly criticism within 8 months of UNC governance. The pattern is unmistakable. The Express applies different editorial standards, frequencies, and intensities based not on actual government performance, but on which party governs. Communication quality acceptable from the PNM becomes intolerable from the UNC. This isn't fourth estate independence. It's partisan political positioning disguised as editorial principle. It's selective outrage masquerading as public service. It's hypocrisy so transparent that citizens increasingly recognize the Express has abandoned journalistic standards for political advocacy. Trinidad and Tobago deserves newspapers that produce editorials with consistent frequency, regardless of which party governs, that apply the same communication standards to all governments, and that distinguish between operational security and dishonesty. Until the Express demonstrates consistent editorial frequency and standards, until it acknowledges its decade of silence, until it explains why weekly criticism is warranted now but wasn't then, the newspaper's editorials deserve recognition for what they are: weekly partisan attacks masquerading as principled concern. The Express isn't genuinely worried about government communication. It's using communication as pretext for weekly criticism of a government it opposed during the election. The newspaper's sudden discovery that weekly editorials are necessary after a decade when they apparently weren't reveals everything about the Express's partisan agenda. When your editorial frequency changes from occasional to weekly based on which party won the election, when you dismiss democratic mandates as providing no immunity against media-manufactured fear, when you frame operational security as deliberate misleading, you've abandoned fourth estate independence for partisan opposition journalism. Prime Minister Persad Bissessar communicates extensively using modern methods that reach citizens directly. The Express dislikes this because it bypasses media gatekeepers. That's the real communication problem. Not that the Prime Minister communicates inadequately, but that she communicates effectively without requiring Express approval or filtering.